A king who conquered kingdoms but never conquered his own wife's bed. The most famous crusader in history married a queen he barely knew, saw her perhaps twice in 10 years, and died without ever giving her a child. This is the true story of Richard the Lionheart and Berengaria of Navarre, the royal marriage that existed only on paper. Spring, 1191. The rocky coast of Cyprus smells of salt and burning Byzantine ships. Richard Plantagenet, already nicknamed the Lionheart, has just seized the island in a lightning campaign during the Third Crusade. He is 33, red-gold bearded, taller than most men, and riding the highest wave of his legend. But right now, in the middle of war, he is furious about a woman. That woman is Berengaria of Navarre. She is 20-something, records are fuzzy, dark-haired, soft-spoken, daughter of King Sancho VI of Navarre. For months, her little fleet has been sailing toward the Holy Land so she can marry Richard, a match cooked up by his mother, the indomitable Eleanor of Aquitaine. The alliance makes perfect political sense. Navarre controls mountain passes the Crusaders need, and Richard needs cash and friends now that he has openly broken with the King of France. The problem? Berengaria's ships were scattered by storms, then captured by the self-proclaimed Byzantine Emperor of Cyprus, Isaac Komnenos. He thought he could hold the princes hostage and squeeze Richard. Bad mistake. Richard smashed Isaac's army, took the island in 3 weeks, and now stands on the shore watching the rescued princess step onto dry land for the first time in weeks. Chroniclers say Richard greeted her with courtesy, nothing more. No sweeping her into his arms, no stolen kiss under the Cypriot sun. Just a nod, a few words, and then back to planning the next battle. On May 12, 1191, in the tiny chapel of Limassol Castle, they were married. The ceremony was rushed because Lent had just ended, and everyone was starving for a celebration. Berengaria wore cloth of gold sent ahead by Eleanor. Richard wore mail under his surcoat because he didn't trust the defeated Cypriots not to try something. The Patriarch of Jerusalem performed the rites in Latin and Greek. Berengaria was crowned Queen of England on the same day, one of only 2 English queens ever crowned outside England. And then, 3 days later, Richard sailed for Acre, leaving his brand new wife behind with his sister Joan and a guard of knights. He would not set foot on the same soil as Berengaria again for another year and a half. Why the rush? Why marry her at all if he was just going to abandon her on an island? The answer is simple and brutal. Richard needed the wedding to happen fast so his mother could stop nagging him, so Navarre would keep sending money and mules, and so Philip of France could not claim Richard was dragging his feet on a sacred promise. Love, desire, even basic curiosity about the woman he had just sworn to honor for life, none of that appears to have entered the equation. Berengaria spent the next month sailing along the coast in Richard's wake, always one port behind the fighting, sleeping in tents and borrowed palaces, waiting for a husband who sent letters about siege engines and ransom money, but never once wrote, "I miss you." This was not unusual for royal marriages. Many happened by proxy, and couples met only years later. But Richard and Berengaria would take it to an extreme almost no one else ever matched. They would spend a grand total of maybe a few weeks in each other's company over the 10 years they were married. And the real question that still puzzles historians today is, did they ever, even once, share a bed as husband and wife? We'll get to that, but first, we have to follow Richard to the blood-soaked walls of Acre and watch the Lionheart become the monster some chroniclers called more cruel than any Saracen.
Summer, 1191. The Siege of Acre is one of the ugliest chapters of the Crusades. For 2 years, the city has held out against a starving Christian army. Corpses rot in the trenches, dysentery kills more men than arrows, and the air reeks of gangrene and despair. Richard arrives like a storm. In 6 weeks, he turns the siege into a slaughterhouse. He builds massive siege towers, rains stones the size of oxen on the walls. And when the city finally surrenders, he orders 2,700 prisoners, men, women, children, marched outside the gates and butchered in full view of Saladin's army. Chroniclers who worshipped him still call it a day of rejoicing. Through all of this, Berengaria is there. Not on the battlefield, she is no Joan of Arc, but close enough to smell the smoke. Her ships anchor off the coast with the rest of the Crusader fleet. She lives in a silk pavilion on the beach, surrounded by English knights who treat her like fragile glass. Every few days, a messenger gallops down from Richard's camp with sealed orders. Stay put, stay safe, send more wine for the kings. She never sees him. Richard is too busy playing warlord. He quarrels with Philip of France, quarrels with Leopold of Austria, catches a fever that nearly kills him, recovers, and then quarrels some more. When Philip finally packs up and sails home, claiming illness, Richard throws a banquet so wild that half the camp wakes up missing their clothes. Berengaria is not invited. Instead, she spends her time with Richard's younger sister Joan, the widowed Queen of Sicily, who has become her only real friend in this floating army. The two women pray together, embroider together, and watch the horizon for sails that might mean peace. Sometimes Provençal troubadours row out to the Queen's ship and sing for their supper. They sing about impossible love, about knights dying for ladies they have never touched. Berengaria listens politely and gives them gold. In September 1191, 4 months after the wedding, Richard finally remembered he had a wife. He sends for her. The fleet moves south to Jaffa, and for the first and possibly only sustained time in their marriage, Richard and Berengaria lived under the same roof, a half-ruined palace the Crusaders have patched up with canvas and captured banners. How long did this honeymoon last? 10 days? 2 weeks? The sources are silent. No chronicler bothered to record whether the king and queen dined together, walked the battlements at sunset, or even spoke beyond the necessities of camp life. All we know is that by October, Richard is on horseback again, riding inland to fight Saladin at Arsuf, and Berengaria is back on her ship. The Great March on Jerusalem begins. Richard gets within sight of the Holy City, close enough to see the golden dome of the rock glinting in the sun, then turns away. He decides it cannot be held. The crusade collapses into negotiations, truces, and recriminations. In the middle of all this, something happens that will follow Berengaria for the rest of her life. Richard decides to send the women home. Joan and Berengaria, along with a chest full of relics and 3 shiploads of Cypriot treasure, are put aboard ships in late 1191 with orders to sail to France and wait for Richard at the papal court in Rome. He promises, on his honor as a Crusader king, that he will join them within months. He never does. Instead, on the way home, Richard's own ship is wrecked off the coast of Aquileia. Disguised as a Templar knight, he tries to ride across Europe incognito. He is recognized, captured by his old enemy, Duke Leopold, and sold to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. Richard the Lionheart, the terror of the Saracens, spends the next year in a German dungeon while minstrels across Christendom sing about his captivity. And Berengaria, she vanishes from the stories almost completely. For the next 14 months, the Queen of England is a ghost. No lands she can rule, no court she can hold, no child in her womb, no husband at her side. She drifts between Poitiers and the Navarrese Pyrenees, living on whatever money Eleanor of Aquitaine can scrape together, waiting for a man who may never come home. The marriage that began with conquest and coronation has become a prison without walls.
1193 to 1194. While Richard sings his way out of a German castle with the ransom ballad Janus Hons Pries, Berengaria lives like a poor relation in her mother-in-law's shadow. Eleanor is busy selling half of England to buy her favorite son back. Berengaria is given one castle in France, Le Mans, and polite smiles. No one calls her Your Grace with any warmth. Richard finally landed in England in March 1194. He stays exactly 34 days, long enough to crush his little brother John's rebellion and get recrowned at Winchester. Berengaria is not invited. She remains on the continent, waiting for a summons that never comes. They met once, maybe twice in 1195, brief, formal encounters at Poitiers or Chinon. Chroniclers record nothing except that Richard gave her a few towns for her upkeep. No kisses, no banquets, no nights together. The Lionheart is already planning his next war against Philip of France. By 1196, Berengaria had quietly moved to Le Mans and begun building a new life. She founds an abbey, endows hospitals, and signs her letters simply B, Queen of England. The English barely notice. Richard never visits. Rumors swirl. The king prefers the company of his male knights. He swore a secret vow of chastity after some crusade sin. He simply never wanted a wife in the first place. Whatever the truth, the result is the same. 10 years into the marriage, Berengaria is still childless, landless in England, and married only on parchment. Then, on 6 April 1199, a crossbow bolt to the shoulder ended everything. Richard dies joking with his surgeons. His last words are not about Berengaria. She is 34 years old, widowed, and finally free. What she does next shocks Europe.
April 1199. The news reaches Le Mans on a cold spring morning. Richard is dead, felled by gangrene after a silly siege in the Limousine. The Lionheart, who survived Saladin's armies and a year in chains, dies because he refused to wear a hauberk while inspecting a petty rebel's treasure. Berengaria is in the cathedral when the messenger arrives. She is 34 or 35, no one is quite sure, and has spent the last 8 years as a queen who never set foot in her kingdom. Chroniclers say she wept, then she stopped weeping. Richard's will is brutal in its silence. He leaves vast sums to his mercenaries, castles to his bastard son, jewels to his sister Joan. To Berengaria, the lawful Queen of England, he leaves nothing at all. Not one manor in England, not one silver cup. His mother Eleanor gets more in a single line than Berengaria does in the entire document. The new king is John, Richard's treacherous younger brother, the one who spent years trying to steal the throne. John has no intention of honoring his brother's widow. Within weeks, he seizes Le Mans, the only city Berengaria controls, and hands it to his mercenaries. Berengaria flees with whatever she can carry and 2 wagons. This is the moment most forgotten queens would fade into a nunnery and die quietly. Berengaria does the opposite. She rides south to her brother Sancho VII in Navarre, borrows money, hires lawyers, and begins the longest, most stubborn lawsuit in medieval history. For the next 16 years she fights John tooth and nail for her dower, the lands and income any widow was legally entitled to. She writes letters in flawless Latin to every pope from Innocent III to Honorius III. She corners bishops, bribes notaries, and sends envoys as far as Rome and Sicily. When John ignores papal orders, she has him excommunicated twice. When he laughs at the sentences, she has the interdict laid on his French lands so thick that priests refuse to say Mass. The English chroniclers hate her for it. They call her greedy, foreign, troublesome. They never mention that John has stolen everything she owns. In 1201, she scored her first victory. Innocent III threatens to place all of England under interdict unless John pays. John caves and promises her 2,000 marks a year and several Norman castles. He never pays a penny. Berengaria keeps fighting. She moves to a modest house outside Le Mans, still hers by right, and turns it into a fortress of paperwork. Her household is tiny, a few Navarrese knights grown old in her service, 2 chaplains, and a flock of clerks who copy every letter 50 times. She signs everything herself in a neat, determined hand. Berengaria, by the grace of God, Queen of England. She also begins to build. In 1204, she founded the Cistercian Abbey of Le Pau, just outside Le Mans, one of the most beautiful Gothic complexes in western France. She lays the first stone herself. The monks call her our foundress and pray for her every day.
When skeptics say a childless foreign queen has no legacy, she points to the rising arches and says nothing. Years pass. John loses Normandy in 1204. Berengaria's dower castles fall to Philip of France. She simply shifts the battlefield and keeps demanding payment in whatever currency John still controls: English wool, Aquitanian wine, hostages. By 1215, when the barons forced Magna Carta on John, one of the lesser-known clauses, Clause 7, guaranteed that Eleanor of Aquitaine's widow rights would be respected. Everyone knows it is really about Berengaria. John still stalls. In 1216, John died, eaten by dysentery and bad peaches, legend says. His 9-year-old son becomes Henry III. The regents are terrified of the fearsome Queen Berengaria, who has outlasted 2 kings. Suddenly, the money starts flowing. Castles are returned. Arrears are paid in silver marks heavy enough to break a table. Berengaria, now in her 50s, grey-haired, thin as a blade, finally wins. She never remarries. She never returns to England. She spends the rest of her life between Le Pau and her brother's court in Navarre, giving away most of the fortune she fought 16 years to collect. When she died on 23 December 1230, the monks of Le Pau buried her under a plain stone slab in the chapter house. The inscription is simple: "Here lies Berengaria, Queen of England, daughter of Navarre, founder of this abbey." No mention of Richard, no mention of the Lionheart at all. She made sure of that.
When the story is told in school books, it ends with Richard dying dramatically beneath the walls of a nowhere castle, arrow in the shoulder, forgiving the boy who shot him, then breathing his last with the words, "To no one will I give my heart but God." Romantic, clean, perfect for statues and pub signs. The truth is uglier and far more interesting. Richard's corpse was hacked apart after death, the way great kings often were. His entrails went into a silver dish at Chalus, his body to the Abbey of Fontevraud at the feet of Henry II, and his actual heart embalmed, wrapped in silk and sealed in a lead casket to Rouen Cathedral. The Lionheart, scattered in 3 directions. Berengaria is not mentioned in any of the funeral plans. She was in Le Mans when the heart arrived in Normandy. She did not attend the ceremonies. She did not send flowers. She simply closed the shutters of her house for 3 days, then reopened them and went back to her endless lawsuit. That is the final proof. 10 years of marriage, 8 years of widowhood war, and still no shared grief. Historians still whisper the question no medieval chronicler dared ask out loud. Did they ever sleep together? Even once? The evidence is a vacuum. No pregnancies, no miscarriages, no gossip of midwives being paid off, no triumphant letters from Eleanor announcing an heir. Richard fathered at least one acknowledged bastard before the marriage, so we know he could. Berengaria lived into her 60s and was never conceived by any other man. Draw your own conclusions. Some say Richard took a secret vow of continence on Crusade after nearly dying of fever. Some say he preferred the company of the young knights who shared his tent. Some say he simply found Berengaria shy, pious, and dull, and she found him loud, violent, and terrifying. All we know for certain is that the marriage bed stayed cold enough to preserve a legend. By the time Berengaria died on 23 December 1238, most of Europe had forgotten she ever existed. Henry III of England sent a polite letter of condolence and nothing else. The monks of Le Pau carried her body into the chapter house she had paid for, stone by stone, and laid her beneath a plain limestone slab. The inscription they carved was deliberate. Berengaria, quondam regina Angliae, huius Aesae fundatrix.
Berengaria, once Queen of England, foundress of this church. No wife of Richard, no Lionheart's lady. She erased him as completely as he had once erased her. Today, if you visit the abbey on a quiet afternoon, the abbey is still there, pale stone glowing in the French sun. The chapter house floor was laid centuries ago, but a small brass plaque marks the spot where she lies. 20 yards away, in the cloister garden, a modern rose called Reine Berengaria grows against the wall, dark crimson, almost black in the shade. 400 miles northeast, in Rouen Cathedral, Richard's embalmed heart sits in its lead box behind an iron grill. Tourists take selfies with it. Hardly anyone knows the woman it never belonged to is buried under roses in a quiet valley. That is the real ending of the story. Richard won every battle except the one that mattered. Berengaria lost everything except the will to outlast him. And when the songs about the Lionheart are finally forgotten, the abbey will still stand and the roses will still bloom. And somewhere under that stone floor, a small, stubborn queen will still be smiling. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. If Berengaria's fight made you angry, proud, or just quietly awed, let me know in the comments. Team Berengaria forever. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll see you in the next forgotten story that refuses to stay buried.